Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing an intense and I think really necessary examination of a horrific case that unfolded in Springfield, Massachusetts between 2017 and 2018. We're talking about the crimes of Stewart Weldon.
And this is a deep dive that goes, far beyond just listing out the violence. We have to address the sheer terror that happened at his residence, 1333 Page Boulevard, which the sources rightly called a house of horrors.
Absolutely.
But our main focus really is on systemic failure.
Yes. Our source material is just incredibly clear on this point. Weldon was not some ghost. He wasn't an unknown entity. This was a violent predator with a documented criminal history stretching back 2 decades. So our mission today is to trace the precise minute-by-minute chronology of these events, from the really critical judicial errors that put him back on the street to the failures of police cooperation and probation enforcement.
All of which paved the exact path for him to escalate.
Exactly, from a known danger into a serial killer.
We're looking at how the very mechanisms designed to protect the public, bail systems, warrant services, how they failed so completely that they basically gave a known violent felon a 3-month window to hunt and kill in the greater Springfield area.
So if we're going to understand the architecture of this tragedy, we have to start at the beginning.
You have to. You have to start where the behavioral blueprint was first drafted.
Okay, so let's start with the background of Stewart Rudolph Weldon. He was born on June 24th, 1977, and the sources point to a really interesting geographical move in his early life. He starts out in Queens, New York, specifically the Jamaica neighborhood.
Right, which is, densely urban, very working class.
And then the family move.
They move across state lines to Montclair, New Jersey, and this move, on paper, it looks like a significant environmental upgrade. You're going from an inner city setting to a pretty affluent, stable suburban town.
A better environment.
A much better environment. But, and this is the key, this improvement in his external circumstances, it did absolutely nothing to fix the underlying internal issues that would, eventually explode years later.
And the sources point to this huge traumatic shift in 1996. Weldon is 19 years old.
And his father dies suddenly.
In the context of criminal pathology, how significant is that? The sudden loss of a father figure at that specific age?
Is hugely significant. At 19, he's just transitioned into adulthood. So the loss of his father removes a potential counterbalance, an authoritative figure in his life. And retrospective accounts from family members, they suggest that after this, Weldon's mother adopted what we can, clinically call an enabling approach.
What does that mean exactly? It's not malicious, right?
No, not at all. It's not malice. It was likely overprotection that was masking itself as supportive behavior, characterized by excessive indulgence, maybe spoiling, which completely eroded any sense of accountability for him.
And this family dynamic, which seems so, so personal, it becomes the very mechanism that allows the Page Boulevard tragedy to unfold 2 decades later. She provided the money for his release from jail, and, critically, she provided the physical location, the house at 1333 Page Boulevard, for him to confine and murder 3 women.
The enabling was structural, it was financial, and it was physical. Exactly.
But before he even moved to Massachusetts, we see the absolute first demonstration of his criminal methodology, what the sources call his criminological signature.
And that was established that same year, 1996, in New Jersey.
That same year.
Okay, let's unpack that term, criminological signature. For you listening, this isn't just his MO, his method. This is about the unique, recurring behaviors a predator uses to satisfy their own psychological or emotional needs.
Right. That's a perfect way to put it. And his was established in Montclair, New Jersey, when he and an accomplice, a guy named Dwight Pottinger, targeted 3 young women at a local mall. The signature wasn't brute force at first.
It was manipulation.
Manipulation and control through deceit. The modus operandi was what you'd call a ruse or a con approach. So they just offered them a ride home.
Exactly. They used this veneer of helpfulness, of trust, to lure these women into a confined space, the car where control could be immediately established. This reliance on deception, instead of just overt violence right away, tells you a lot about his confidence in his ability to manipulate people.
And the selection process within that group of 3 is so telling. It shows the goal wasn't just random crime. It was a specific desire for isolation.
The sources are very clear on that. While 2 of the women were eventually released, Weldon and Pottinger forcibly detained the 3rd victim. That act of separation, singling out one person for complete isolation, for transport, and then for sexual assault, is a profound hallmark of a sexually motivated offender who is driven by total control.
So that one incident in 1996, it establishes 3 crucial elements of his signature. One, the reliance on manipulation, the ruse.
Hmm.
Two, the use of a vehicle for containment and transportation. And three, the ultimate goal of isolated, total control over a victim, leading to sexual violence.
That is the entire blueprint. And he was convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault for it. This was the first official documentation of the extreme danger he posed. But, the conviction didn't lead to long-term incapacitation. And by the early 2000s, he had just moved his center of operations to Springfield, Massachusetts, carrying that exact documented pattern for violent predation with him.
Which meant that any failure by the Massachusetts system to enforce its own rules would put the community in direct danger from his already established criminal pattern.
Precisely.
The next decade and a half is so crucial because it really answers our central question. How did a man who was already labeled a kidnapper and a rapist get the freedom to escalate into serial murder? The sources present this very clear staircase of escalation where the system just consistently misses the warning signs.
And when he arrives in Springfield, the violations, they start small, but they signal this persistent rejection of authority. So in 2002, you see charges like resisting arrest, disorderly conduct.
Right, not the sexual violence in 96.
No, but it shows a willingness to physically confront law enforcement, to confront community members when he's challenged. It's fundamental defiance.
And his methods, they expand by 2010. He's arrested for trying to break into a grocery store on Belmont Avenue in Springfield. But the significance here isn't the B&E, is it? It's what he did when he was confronted.
Exactly. When the police tried to stop him, he initiated a high-speed pursuit through the streets of Springfield. He was using the vehicle not just for moving around, but as a high-risk tool of evasion. It reinforces that 1996 pattern of using the car for criminal purposes.
And that got him an 18-month jail sentence.
A temporary interruption, not a deterrent.
Because as soon as he's back in the community, he skips the property crime and shifts right back to armed interpersonal violence, which is always the biggest red flag you can have.
We see that violent plateau established in Westfield, Massachusetts. In January 2015, the charges included assault and battery and, critically, assaults with a dangerous weapon. He's moved from just resisting arrest or property crime back to the aggressive control he showed in 1996. He was using weapons again to hurt people.
So by the end of 2016, we have a man who has demonstrated across 2 states in 2 decades a signature involving sexual violence, kidnapping, using his car to escape, and armed assault.
And yet he remained in the community.
Which brings us to 2017, the pivot year. This is where the failures stop being just errors and they become catastrophic enablers.
And the sources detail 3 critical failures in 2017. The first one, in May, is a textbook example of just bureaucratic rigidity completely paralyzing an investigation.
Failure number 1, the Chicopee jurisdictional lapse. A woman shows up at Bay State Medical Center and reports a rape to the Chicopee Police Department. This was a gift-wrapped opportunity to catch Weldon before the murders even began.
It was. The victim provided a detailed, harrowing account. The investigative trail was warm, but she told the police the assault happened at the attacker's house, which she thought was in Springfield. And this is where the bureaucratic friction point happens.
The Chicopee PD declined to investigate.
Citing jurisdictional boundaries, they were operating strictly by the book. Crime happened outside our city limits, so we transfer it.
And that rigid adherence to process, the failure of any real cross-jurisdictional cooperation, it was fatal. Chicopee officers offered only to transport the victim to Springfield PD to file the report there.
And the victim, she's suffering from acute physical and psychological trauma. She declined the immediate transport. She said she would go later.
And she didn't. She didn't report to Springfield police until June 2018 after Weldon was already caught.
A year later.
That single institutional failure delayed the processing of DNA evidence that later definitively linked Weldon to that May 2017 rape. So a violent rapist was allowed to stay free and active in the greater Springfield area because of a line on a map.
The system didn't just miss an opportunity. It actively failed to close a case that was handed to it. And emboldened, Weldon's defiance escalates even further in October 2017, leading to the second failure.
This was another violent assault on a woman, and when police tried to intervene, he fled in his vehicle, leading another high-speed chase through Springfield.
But this time, he weaponized the vehicle in a much more unambiguous way. When he was cornered, he deliberately tried to ram his car into a police cruiser.
He turned it into a deadly weapon.
Instantly. And when that failed, he reached for a knife. He was subdued, but the charges, they reflected the clear danger. Assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, assault and battery on a police officer. This was Weldon screaming to the justice system, "I am a threat to life."
And yet this brings us to failure number 3, the fatal bail hearing, November 21st, 2017 in Springfield District Court. This is the moment where the judge, David Ricciardone, took a man who had just tried to ram a police cruiser and stab officers and gave him the key to the killing season.
Weldon was initially held on $2,500 bail. His defense attorney, a public defender named Timothy Noonan, requested reduction to $150.
150.
Right. And this request, it leaned into the philosophy that bail shouldn't, unduly punish defendants who can't pay a core idea of modern bail reform.
But the prosecution, Assistant District Attorney Karen Bell, argued vehemently against it. I mean, what was her specific justification? What did she tell the judge?
Bell's argument was laser-focused on public safety, not finances. She specifically cited the extreme violence of the ramming incident and his willingness to attack officers. She laid out the clear evidence of his anti-authority violence and his lethality. She characterized him as an extreme danger and a severe flight risk. The threat was explicit.
So the judge had a clear professional warning from the state about the immediate physical danger Weldon posed. What possible justification did Judge Ricciardone use to override that and reduce the bail?
The sources suggest the judge prioritized the systemic pressure about fairness in bail over the specific, unique facts of Weldon's case. Ricciardone lowered the bail to $1,000.
1,000.
That decision effectively disregarded the explicit evidence that Weldon had just used his vehicle as a potentially lethal weapon days earlier. It was a failure to distinguish between a low-level nonviolent offender and a documented escalating violent felon.
And the consequence was predictable and immediate. The enabling pattern we talked about earlier continued. Weldon's mother paid the $1,000 bail. He was released with GPS monitoring, but he was free.
And terrifyingly, the sources note that in December 2017, just as the killings were starting, another judge actually modified his curfew to allow him to be present for the birth of his child.
That juxtaposition is chilling. The system is trying to facilitate domestic normalcy while simultaneously releasing this documented escalating predator.
The chronology is just stark. Judge Ricciardone lowered the bail on November 21st, 2017. Less than 2 weeks later, the killing began.
The release of Stewart Weldon triggered an immediate systematic spree. This next part is the strict, devastating chronology of the victims, and it illustrates a direct cost of those systemic failures in November 2017.
He was released from custody in late November. The speed at which he acted just confirms what the prosecution argued. His violent compulsions were just suppressed during his brief time in jail. They weren't deterred at all.
The first victim was America Lydon. We have to say the names. She was a 34-year-old native of Springfield, Massachusetts.
America Lydon was reported missing on December 1st, 2017. That's just 10 days after Weldon walked out of Springfield District Court on that $1,000 bail. The immediacy of the abduction shows he was hunting almost instantly.
And at the time, Lydon's case was just categorized as a missing person. How critical was that initial categorization, especially for marginalized individuals?
It meant the investigation lacked the urgency of a known homicide, even while her remains were already decomposing inside the offender's residence at 1333 Page Boulevard. The system was operating on the assumption of a routine disappearance, completely unaware that a convicted kidnapper, known for using his car to prey on people, was active in their community because of their own errors.
The second victim followed in the next few weeks, cementing the pattern. Kayla Escalante.
Kayla Escalante was 27 years old. She lived in Ludlow, which is a town right next to Springfield. She vanished in that short window between late December 2017 and January 2018.
And the fact that she was abducted from Ludlow is so important, isn't it? It connects right back to his original MO. He was using his vehicle to travel and acquire victims. This wasn't a static crime. He was widening his predatory geofence beyond his immediate neighborhood, using the exact tool he'd used against the police months before.
This expansion of his hunting ground made him harder to trace. It masked the one geographic commonality that would eventually link all the victims to 1333 Page Boulevard.
And then we get to the second catastrophic systemic failure of this period, the enforcement gap. The system had another explicit chance to intervene in February 2018, and they failed just as profoundly as the court had in November.
On February 12, 2018, Weldon cut off his electronic tether. He severed his GPS monitoring device, officially violating his probation. An arrest warrant was immediately issued. This meant the police and the probation department knew definitively that a violent fugitive was on the loose.
He had just tried to stab police officers, and now he was signaling his intention to disappear by cutting his court-ordered leash. But the sources confirm he didn't disappear, did he?
He did not. Despite the active felony warrant for violating probation, Stewart Weldon continued to live at his registered address at 1333 Page Boulevard without being arrested for about 3 months.
3 months.
This failure of the probation and warrant service is just staggering, and it allowed for the third murder.
That is an unforgivable institutional lapse. 3 months where authorities knew exactly where the warrant should be served, and yet they delayed, or just failed to prioritize, arresting a man they knew was violent and a flight risk.
And in that window of inaction, Ernestine Ryans became the third victim. Ernestine Ryans was 47 years old, and she lived in Springfield.
She was reported missing in March 2018, weeks after Weldon had officially become a fugitive. So we have America Leiden, 34, in December, Kayla Escalante, 27, in late December, January, and Ernestine Ryans, 47, in March. All three were adult women, often from marginalized populations who, tragically, didn't generate that kind of immediate, high-priority investigation that might have led police to the front door of 1333 Page Boulevard sooner.
The victimology suggests a focus on individuals who might be transient, or whose sudden disappearance might be rationalized by investigators as, them just leaving voluntarily. This delays the crucial realization that a serial offender is active. It's precisely why the sociological term less dead sometimes applies. It refers to the delayed or deprioritized investigation into victims from marginalized backgrounds.
And the system's failure to enforce the warrant just extended that window of vulnerability.
Exactly.
Now we have to go inside that location. The house at 1333 Page Boulevard, Springfield. It was the nucleus of the terror. It wasn't just a place where bodies were disposed of. It was the operational center for Weldon's sadism. It was a killing ground and a long-term detention center.
The environment inside that home is inseparable from the crimes. This single-family residence was owned by Weldon's mother. The sources confirm she was living there during all three murders and the captivity of the survivor.
We talked about her early enabling behavior, but her presence during the crimes raises these profound questions about her awareness. Neighbors described the household as quiet, secluded, and even freaky. So how does the analysis handle this idea of willful blindness?
It's incredibly complex. While there was no criminal charge against the mother, the fact remains that 3 bodies were decomposing in and around the home she lived in for months. The sources suggest she likely operated in a state of extreme denial or willful ignorance. She provided the sanctity of that residential space, which offers a perfect camouflage to a predator. A house where a mother lives is generally seen by society, even by police, as a zone of normalcy.
It gave him the perfect, undetectable venue for his prolonged acts of torture.
And the survivor's testimony is the most chilling part of this entire case. It's the absolute breakthrough that stopped Weldon. It's here we understand the true depth of his sadism, that his primary gratification was from sustained control and torture, not just from the immediate act of killing.
This is the crucial distinction, right, between a spontaneous killer and a sadistic predator.
Absolutely. The survivor provided minute details of Weldon's methodology, and it demonstrates this highly methodical, premeditated intent.
So let's detail the specifics of that confinement. The sources emphasize the duration of the control, both physical and psychological.
The survivor was held captive for an extended period, a terrifying month-long captivity. A month. That's a significant amount of time, requiring planning and constant attention from the captor. And during this time, the sources detail his use of a deliberate kit of torture tools.
A kit. That implies preparation. It suggests he planned the suffering, that he went out of his way to get instruments specifically for inflicting severe damage. What was in this kit?
The kit included hammers, screwdrivers, and various blunt objects. These are not firearms or, quick-acting instruments. They are tools designed for blunt trauma and methodical, prolonged pain and disfigurement. The presence and the systematic use of this kit strongly suggest that Weldon got sexual gratification directly from the process of torture itself.
And the injuries she sustained, they're difficult to even think about, but they confirm just how ferocious this methodology was.
They were cataloged as grotesque and violent. The specific trauma included a fractured jaw, which suggests immense, deliberate force targeting her ability to communicate or cry out. She also had multiple stab wounds to her abdomen and severe leg infections from untreated trauma. It indicates a total disregard for her life and an interest only in extending her suffering. And she was raped repeatedly throughout her captivity.
And the psychological impact was just as profound. She felt absolute terror.
She told the police, "I never thought I would get away." Weldon had established complete psychological control, convincing her that any attempt to resist or escape would mean her immediate death. That total control over life and death, physical, sexual, and psychological, that was the ultimate goal inside 1333 Page Boulevard.
The analysis of his disposal methods is also revealing. He didn't use remote dump sites. He was comfortable living with the remains of America. Leiden, Kayla Escalante, and Ernestine Ryans.
This is a consistent pattern you see in certain types of highly narcissistic, control-driven serial offenders. They internalize the evidence. They keep their trophies close. The sources confirm the bodies were found in and around the home.
Where specifically were they concealed?
Reports indicate bodies were found hidden in the basement, the classic location for secretive activity in a home, and potentially buried in the yard, which indicates an attempt to integrate the crimes into the property itself. This required specialized technology.
And the mechanism that finally forced the police to act after ignoring that 3-month GPS warrant was something entirely non-criminal.
The smell.
The smell.
By late May 2018, the advanced decomposition had created a foul odor that was so pervasive it was inescapable. This odor finally prompted Weldon's mother to contact the police about suspicious activity, inadvertently forcing the search of the property she had, in a way, protected for so long.
So the resolution to this case didn't come from the missing persons reports, which were languishing, or from the outstanding arrest warrant, which was ignored. It came from the most mundane of police actions. A simple traffic stop.
It's the definition of fortuitous. It was not some grand investigative effort that brought him down, but just routine traffic enforcement.
So tell us about the stop on Wilbraham Road. What was the pretext?
On Sunday, May 27, 2018, Springfield police officers pulled Weldon over on Wilbraham Road. The infraction was minimal, a broken taillight, but inside that vehicle, they found the surviving victim.
The source material paints a vivid picture of what the officer saw. She was in extreme distress, but her injuries must have been immediately obvious.
They were. Officers saw visible trauma, including the broken jaw and multiple stab wounds, injuries that were too severe and too fresh to be ignored. And despite her profound physical pain and the psychological control Weldon had exerted for a month, she acted.
She managed to signal her danger.
She did. She reportedly exclaimed loudly that she had been kidnapped, confirming the officers' immediate suspicion. She gave them critical initial details, that she had been held for a month, beaten repeatedly with a hammer, and raped. Her quick action saved her life and directly led to the end of Weldon's killing spree.
She later told police, "Thank you for saving my life."
Mm-hmm.
Weldon was arrested instantly. Kidnapping, carrying a dangerous weapon, resisting arrest. The magistrate who set his bail this time clearly understood the danger the previous judge had missed.
Absolutely. His bail was set at $1 million, a profound, necessary, and justified contrast to that catastrophic $1,000 bail set just 6 months earlier by Judge Ricky Ardone. The system finally recognized the lethal risk he posed.
Following his arrest and the report from his mother about the overwhelming foul odor, a search warrant was executed on 1333 Page Boulevard on June 1st, 2018.
And the search confirmed the worst fears. Police located the decomposing remains of 3 women, confirming the house was the geographic center of his operational sadism. The medical examiner's office later identified the victims as America Leiden, Ernestine Ryans, and Kayla Escalante.
The documentation of the names and places is so important, so they're not forgotten in this discussion of systemic failure.
Exactly. And given the nature of the concealment, the basement, the potential burial spots in the yard, investigators had to treat the scene as a much larger crime site.
They used specialized forensic units.
That's right. The Hampton District Attorney's Office called in units that used ground-penetrating radar to meticulously scan the yard and the basement. This was done to ensure that no other victims beyond the 3 discovered were buried on the property. It just indicates the scale of suspicion they had about the depth of his predation.
And the subsequent investigation confirmed that his reign of terror was far more extensive than just the 3 murder victims and the survivor from his car. The indictment was truly massive.
In August 2018, a Hampden County grand jury returned a sweeping 52-count indictment against Stewart Weldon. The critical detail here is that the charges covered crimes against 11 separate victims.
11 victims.
That speaks volumes about the volume and frequency of his predatory activities during that window the system gave him.
And that number 11 victims covered by the indictment, it reminds us that for every murder victim, there were numerous others he had attempted to control, kidnap, or sexually assault.
The charges reflected that. 3 counts of murder in the first degree for Leiden, Escalante, and Ryans. but also multiple counts of kidnapping, aggravated rape, strangulation, and assault with a dangerous weapon, covering the full scope of his signature behavior.
Given the horrific nature of these crimes, Weldon underwent mental health evaluations at Bridgewater State Hospital. Was there any successful attempt to argue for incompetence or insanity?
No, he was ultimately found competent to stand trial. That decision affirmed that he understood the charges against him, and it dismantled any potential insanity defense. It forced him to face the consequences of his actions.
And then, just before the trial is set to begin in September 2021, Weldon chose to plead guilty.
He pleaded guilty to 39 of the 52 charges, including all 3 counts of first-degree murder. His motivation was simple and chilling. I just want to close this case.
A maneuver that, while preventing the victims' families from gaining full public testimony, it did allow for immediate judicial closure.
And the state secured the highest possible conviction without risking the unpredictable nature of a jury trial. The sentence ensured that the systemic failures that let him walk free would never put him back into the community.
He received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Yes, the Hampden County District Attorney was explicit. Weldon would never be free to hunt in Springfield again. But the emotional damage, of course, remains. It's encapsulated by the testimony of one victim's mother who said, "My future children will never know their grandmother. The defendant took away my daughter."
So if we zoom out from the horrifying specifics of 1333 Page Boulevard, the tragedy is rooted in the justice system's inability to connect the dots. Weldon wasn't a ghost. He was a violent, high-risk offender whose patterns were meticulously documented.
The documentation of the chronology Leiden immediately after bail, Escalante shortly after, Ryan's during that 3-month fugitive phase, it just lays bare the precise window of opportunity that systemic fragmentation created.
That decision in November 2017 to prioritize a philosophy of bail over the immediate proven physical safety risk, followed by the failure of warrant enforcement in February 2018, directly facilitated the murder of 3 women. The system knew where he was, what he was capable of, and it still failed to stop him.
Until a broken taillight on Wilbraham Road intervened.
Stewart Weldon currently serves his life sentences at the Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And considering the multiple distinct systemic failures we've detailed, the jurisdictional lapse, the fatal bail reduction, and the 3-month failure to enforce a probation warrant at his known address, this raises an important question for you, the listener, to explore.
We know that financial justice is important. Bail shouldn't be used just to punish poverty.
Of course.
But when an individual has repeatedly demonstrated escalating anti-authority violence, specifically using weapons and attempting to kill police officers, this raises a fundamental ethical and public safety debate. At what point should a justice system permanently incapacitate an offender, ensuring that philosophical or financial concerns never outweigh the immediate proven threat to the lives of innocent citizens?
News about the warnings that were ignored and the cost of those delays?